when they start like, losing their passion a little bit, I take a break sometimes and I say, you guys, let's talk about this book, right? Who are you making this book for? Who are you making these pages for, right? I want you to think about, I want you to name like your 5 favorite people at the school, okay? You could be closest friends, people you admire. I want you to think about seniors you admire. I want you to think about teachers who may be retiring next year. I want you to think about, anybody on this campus that who means something to you, right? And so name them. So I go around and ask everyone to name these 5 people, right? And then I ask them, okay, so I want you to think about this, all right? When the yearbook comes out, and for you, it's gonna be, like Karen, it's gonna be, Joey, whoever it may be, whoever you name, right? Okay, I want to picture their expression. I want to picture what their face will look like when they open this book. What do you want them to feel when they come to that page that they're a part of, right? And so I want you to think about them as you make this book. I want you to think about, them laughing, smiling as they open these pages, and the oohs and the ahs, right? And I want you to think about them with their sons and daughters and grandchildren 30, 40, 50 years from now, opening this book with them, right? What do you think the child will feel? Okay. Like, oh my goodness, grandpa, you had hair one time, right? Or something like that, right? Okay. And so I want you to experience that. That's yearbook is something that's not transitory. It's not a snap or a tweet. That's something that goes away, right? We're making something that's going to last like, possibly 60, 70, 80 years. How many people can say that? Not many things last very long these days, right? And so you're making it for them, right? In the metaphor, we're making them a home, basically, a home for their memories to be held. Yeah. But of course, we all know vision only takes you so far, right? We all know that vision leaks very fast too, and vision alone is not going to get the work done. Pep talks, we all know they get people pumped up, but for how long, right? Because when school starts and AP classes overwhelm them, senioritis cripples them, high school drama takes over their not yet fully developed prefrontal cortex, the quality of these books will suffer, right? Then you take ownership, right? But how do you take ownership? For me, the best way for students to take ownership is for you to develop student leaders. Okay, and so that's why for me, my goal is to develop leaders. I make it very clear to them. Look, I'm not here to create a yearbook. It was in the beginning. In the first 2-3 years, I went around like a madman taking pictures, go to every photo shoot, supervise everything, right? I wrote a bunch of story copies myself. I worked on layouts. I fixed their pages. And I'm like, what am I doing? This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be advising, right? I'm supposed to be mentoring, right? Jay Willard, the founder of Marriott Hotel, right? And he said something that his son Bill quotes often as well. And everyone in the Marriott, business, they know this quote, right? If you take care of your employees, they will take care of your customers, right? And so my job, a couple years into yearbook, was okay. I need to take care of my leaders more than anyone else. I need to take care of my leaders. Okay? I need to make sure they're doing well. I need to build into them, right? So identifying leaders. Sometimes you have a clear idea who's going to be editor-in-chief. More often than not, if you're starting new, you don't know, right? It can't always be the loudest person. It can't be just the one that, has all the talk or enthusiasm, but would they be able to go the distance, right? And not knowing who editor-in-chief is in the beginning is okay, I think, right? I don't always announce it right away. There are some years where there's such a strong like carryover, we know right away who that's going to be, right? But if I'm not sure, there's a lot of transition and turnover, then I'm going to hold off on that decision, okay? And I always make sure I don't ignore the quiet ones. For some reason, the quiet, shy ones, they have been my best leaders, right? Because they lead by example. And then another thing about interviews, Laszlo Bock, he's the founder, he's the head of Google People Operations at Google. I don't know if he's that position anymore, but he wrote a great book called Work Rules. And he talks about, give us an insight into how Google works and, inside look at Google, especially when it comes to hiring, right? And culture. And so he said interviews are mostly useless. And we're like, what? Right? He says most job interviews are not very productive at all, right? Because you can't determine a whole lot from the interview. So what they do is they really give them tasks, right? They give them tasks to perform at an interview. Of course, when it comes to tech jobs, you always have the regular interview, and then you have a tech interview, right? And so the best way really is to see people work, right? And so summer is a great time, but if you don't have that opportunity to work with them with the summer, then it's not too late in the school year to create teams and get them to work before you even decide who's going to be the leader. Okay, because what I do is I create like 4 or 5 teams, depending, each team should have about 3 to 5 people minimum, depending on how many people I have total. But I try to divide the teams and then see how they perform within that team, right? The leader will emerge, right, within the next couple of weeks, and then finally I'll create my leadership team from that. And I always try to include like 1 leader, 1 assistant leader, and make sure there's a photographer, and sometimes we talk about, we draft people, we exchange team members sometimes if we need to, right? The other thing I do is I don't divide, like I don't assign like, okay, you're in charge of all the sports, you're in charge of student life. Okay, if you look at my ladder, the way we draft pages is like we just take turns. Okay, once I know who the leaders are, then we just go around, okay, what's the page you want to work on, right? What page you want to work on? So it's kind of like all over the place. People, teams, they all work on different pages. Number one, I found that a little more interesting, because if you're in a team and you're stuck in that team and all that team does is sports, then you're like, I don't even like sports, right? Okay. But also I've noticed that a lot of kids, they like different sports. They like different aspects of different things. They don't want to be stuck with one thing only. So a team can, but the other cool thing is that they pick the pages they want to work on. So that there's more ownership there, right? They want to work on that particular spread, right? And so they can only pick one at a time. And then they can see like, oh, I was gonna pick that one. Yeah, let's trade that one. I'll give you this, and which one do you want to, like trading Pokemon cards or something, right? Yeah. And so once the team has been assigned with each of the spreads, then they're ready to go and start working on it. Okay. And what I found really amazing was how incredible this team identity became. Or that became stronger than their yearbook identity. Okay. This is actually a page from our yearbook spread, and they call themselves like Team Cheesy Weenie, Team Spicy Lemon Tacos. I don't even know what they're talking about. I don't know what. There's just a bunch of inside jokes for them. Okay. And they fear their team leader more than they feared me. Okay. There were years where I kind of became bored. I had nothing to do because the team leaders and their teams, they did everything, right? And I'm like, this is how it should be. Meanwhile, I just make sure I take care of my leaders. Okay. I always brought them back. Okay, let's have a meeting, guys. Okay. And then they would vent like, so-and-so's not doing this, so-and-so's not doing this. They would vent. And I'm like, I told you guys, this is hard. Okay. But I always remind them as well that, look, eventually I want you to think of this. You're not here to make the yearbook either. You're here to raise leaders. Okay. And so that now their mindset is shifting. They're looking for, because what happened was some years, my leaders did everything and they would leave. And then they would not train the people. They would not give up control, right? They wanted to be in charge of everything, do everything. They didn't invest in their people. They just, worked on their pages. And so I had to remind them again and again, okay? And eventually they got it. Eventually they understood the process of mentoring, right? And then they start relying on each other as well, okay? I want to share a story, okay, from this book that I read about 7 years ago called The Dream Manager. It's this book right here, okay? It's a very like small, honestly, it didn't sell very well, actually. I just found it through a friend of mine, and it's an incredible book. So Dream Manager is an allegory, a modern day parable of how a company transformed itself and all their employees by really caring for each other. The moment I read it, it shook me to my core, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this has to change the trajectory of my life. Okay, this has to change how I work, how I teach, how I see my family, how I see other people, right? And it's been a slow process, obviously, of change, but it's been a very meaningful one. And so that summer, I finished that book like around March, April, and I couldn't wait for yearbook summer camp, because we used to have these summer camps, and I don't know if they're legal or not, but I heard it from a advisor, not from a student that that attended my church, and she told me that their yearbook, I knew she was the editor in chief of the Whitney yearbook, Whitney High School yearbook, and I asked like, hey, which camp do you guys go to? Like, oh, we alternate. She said, some years we go to our like our publisher's camp, and then next year we go to beach house. And I'm like, what, a beach house? Like, how is that possible, right? So ever since she said that, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to do that too. So we've been taking yearbook retreats at beach houses, at mountain cabins. Yeah, it was pretty incredible. We ran a beach house in San Clemente. We went to a bigger hotel in Long Beach, right? We had these like retreats every summer, and I'm like, wait a minute. And so it was hard getting approval. It got harder and harder. So I stopped going because I was like just too much liability on me, to do a trip like this. But and then so they will go on their own. Actually, they're like, Mr. Kim, I know you don't like that. So, and I'm like, okay, well, I can't stop you from going. I can't endorse it either, right? So what I would tell them then is like, okay, so when you guys are done, can you come back? And so they didn't even want me to come anymore. They're like, yeah, we're good. We'll take care of everything. Okay. So they would plan the whole camp. They would share, they would bond, they would plan, and like, Mr. Kim, we got all these ideas ready to go now. Yeah. So it was one of those camps that they attended, and then at the end of that camp, we decided to meet together with the kids that couldn't make it to the camp, and so we all met in my association pool, and we're all gathered by the pool. And I said, bring your journals. It was the last night of the camp for them, and I shared this with them. I said to bring their journal, and I told them about the story of the Dream Manager, and how that changed how I, wanted to run Yearbook next year. This is a true story, but in the book, it's a parable. They combine different stories, but it's actually a lot of it is a true story of a couple who owns a janitorial contracting company in Cincinnati. It's called Jancoa, but in the book, it's called the Admiral Janitorial Services. Bill and Mary Miller, they're the actual couple that did this, but it's actually, somewhat mostly true, somewhat fictional. Okay, it's a parable. Okay? So Jancoa, well, I'm gonna call it Admiral or Jancoa, they had a problem. Okay, a turnover rate that was about 400%. Okay, so the cost of training new people, cost of recruiting new hires was so high. Okay, and this is a problem that every janitorial company had. The average is about 400% a year. Okay, so many people they would get hired, they would quit after a week, they would get hired again, a new person would get hired, they would leave after a month. No one stayed very long, right? And the cost was just way too high. So in the book, Simon, the character, he was hired to like, okay, we gotta figure this out. How do we get people to stay here, right? So he started doing some digging around, like why are people quitting, right? So he decides to kind of ask around, like, let's do a survey. So he sent out an employee, and there's like, a couple hundred people in that company, right? And they offer janitorial services. They go clean, different classrooms and banks and whatnot, and local businesses. And so he asked them like, okay, what is the number one reason you think people are quitting? And the answer was surprisingly very simple. It was transportation. And like, oh, why, right? And they're like, oh, I see. Okay, a lot of these were low-income people. They didn't own their own cars. They need to rely on someone else to drive them there or take the bus to get to and fro from work. So they start at the at Janqua, okay, and then they have to go to that site, with the van, and they come back, and it's past midnight now, right? There's no buses running at that time, right? So they start, and then somehow their cars break down, or it was a simple solution, right? And so the company said, okay, you know what? We can afford to get a shuttle. So they started offering shuttle services. Okay. And all of a sudden, 60% of the people took these shuttles to and from. And turnover rate dropped by 200% only, which is still high, right? But it was half of what the industry average was. Okay. A simple solution like that. They didn't even think about it until they asked the people. And there's a lesson here for Yearbook as well, right? Sometimes we assume the problem is something else. Right? But until we ask, we talk to the leaders, the problem may be something completely different. Sometimes it may be an easy solution. Sometimes it may not be an easy solution, right? So then what to do? Okay, 200% is not good enough. Okay, so the leadership team got together. Simon started brainstorming. They started talking. Why are people still quitting? Why is it so high still? And then they realized, you know what? Okay, in a sense, it's not surprising that people quit because nobody, like, okay, not nobody, but most people don't grow up thinking, oh, one day I want to be a janitor, right? One day I want to own a janitorial company, right? Um, for many people, this is a transition job, right? It's something they do until they find something better. But for some of them, this could be a good job, right? It could pay well. I mean, we all know, like, some janitorial job, they pay really well, actually, right? But it's something that's transitional. But along the way, you know, a lot of people's dreams kind of like die with reality, right? They're not in their dream jobs, and this is definitely not one of them, right? So they said, like, how do we care for our people more? How do we invest in them more? Like, that was the question that they asked, right? How do we help them want to stay, right? How do we show that we care about them, right? So let's see, what are their goals? Okay, so what are these people's goals? So they sent another survey. So what are some of your life goals? And some people turned in surveys, some people didn't. Okay, so they started reading these surveys and like, wow, these are incredible, right? Some people wanted this, and they have different goals. So now, what do we do about it? So they decided to hire a dream manager. Okay, and that was actually the title of the person that they wanted to hire. Now, what kind of person would this person be? This person would be a life coach. This person would have to know about finances. They'd have to be a financial manager, kind of a slash counselor type, right? So they interview a bunch of people and they settled on someone named Sean, right? So Sean was brought on as a dream manager. Of course, this is kind of new, right? Like everyone, you can sign up for a session with a dream manager. Like, what? What is that? That makes no sense at all, right? Okay, but started walking around, asking people, talking, engaging people, and eventually some people started signing up, okay, for their first session. Rita was one of the catalysts. Okay, so Rita was one of the site managers. She was 54. She lived in a tough neighborhood, super sharp, leader type. Okay, but she's been renting her whole life. And she said, you know what? I've always wanted to own my own home, but I don't think I can afford it, because I'm supporting all these kids, my family, and you know, and so I don't think. Do you think there's something in there for me? Like, well, let's sit down. Okay, how much do you make? And she made decent amount of money, right? But everything went to all the expenses, right? And she started crunching the numbers. Of course, the big problem is no down payment. Okay, so Sean calls his friend Dan, who works for low income housing, and they find a program for her, right, where there's no down payment for first time home buyer, right? And so, like, hey, they crunched the numbers, talked to the realtors, and they found her a place. At the end, it was only $60 more than her rent price with no down payment. So they got her into that house. Okay. And she was so excited. She could not believe it. After all the years, she was able to buy a house, right? And so she became the ambassador. She started going, telling everyone, like, you guys have to go talk to Sean. Go talk to Sean. She's like, she started harassing everybody. Go talk to Sean. She became the number one, evangelist for this program, right? She would invite people to her house, like, come check out my house, right? And this is what he was able to do for me, right? And then so as different people went to meet with Sean, they started talking about, oh, what is your dream? And then they would say, like, always wanted to learn how to speak English, right? And so many people had that as one of their dreams, because they're Hispanic, a lot of them, right? So okay, cool. So they started offering English classes after before the session started, right? Before their shift started, right? Next thing you know, they asked, like, hey, they help so many people with their finances, correct? How to meet their goals. I want to take my family on a vacation. Okay, let's see how to make this work. Okay, and then talk to HR, like, hey, you know what? They need this chunk of time. Okay? And then they said, can I bring my family for this session? They're like, oh, okay. We never thought about that. So they start bringing their wives and their children, helping kids with college consulting, college plans, career plans. They start helping with all kinds of stuff, Eventually, they had to hire another dream manager because they were booked solid. So many people wanted to talk to them, right? Imagine having free, like, legal counsel, life advice, financial advice, all in one place, right? Next thing you know, the nobody's quitting anymore, right? Turnover rates almost like none, right? And then there's this one wife and the husband, they came in together one day and for a session, and so what is your dream? And she started crying, right? And like, oh, what's going on? And she goes like, I can't tell you what you've done for my family, because um my husband's a different man now. Okay. You have transformed not only him, but our children, our family. um you don't know what it's like to wake up next to a man who has dreams. And I'm like, how did a janitorial company do this? How did they do it? You know, to thank you so much for what you've done, for our family. And so next, they didn't want to stop there, right? The turnover rate went way down, right? Referrals started coming from everywhere, right? And people were performing at such high rate that um, they were getting promoted, but they couldn't promote within the company. There was no more promotion opportunity in the company. So they decided to do is send these people out, find better jobs for them elsewhere. What is it? Before it was the opposite problem, right? They couldn't retain people. Now they're sending people out to better jobs, right? Now, what company would do that? Everyone's, trying to poach talent from somewhere else. But this company got to a point, they're like, we have so much talent here. People are so committed. They have so much ownership. We have to send them out. And they start sending people out. Another interesting thing that happened was the supply usage dropped by more than half. They were using less cleaner, less toilet paper, less towels. Why? Because they stopped stealing it. All these janitors, they had side hustles doing cleaning services. They would take it wasn't stealing, it was borrowing, right? Borrowing some surplus stuff. And they didn't realize what caring for them would do, right? And it transformed the company. So I read that book. It's a very short book, very short book. I kind of read you the whole book basically already. Okay, you might want to pick it up though. So at that summer retreat, we're just sitting around, and I shared the story of the dream manager. And I said, okay, guys, I need you to write down 20 dreams and goals right now. Go ahead, go off on your own and go write down and I don't care what they are, small to big dreams, easy to daunting, nearly impossible. I don't care. Short-term dreams and long-term dreams, anything, everything goes. And I started writing mine down too, and I realized, when did I stop dreaming? Why do we stop dreaming? Why do we stop? Because life gets to you, because you're busy surviving. You don't have time to dream anymore. And so people started sharing, I want to learn how to play the piano. I want to learn. They started reading their dreams. And then people would start interrupting them like, oh, I could teach you that, right? One guy was like a master swimmer in the swim team. Like, I never learned how to swim. We're at a pool, right? And she's like, I could teach you that, right? They start volunteering help with each other because they never knew that was one of their dreams. And we didn't know that was a dream, And I started dreaming too. I started thinking about, okay, what am I going to do for the remaining of my life? What are my plans, right? Okay. And some kids started sharing things like, I want a better relationship with my father. Okay, cool. How are we going to get there? Right. And then people started crying, and then whenever one person shared a dream, everyone started writing more dreams. And it started being contagious, and they started sharing stuff, and it was a sob party, man. I was like, oh my goodness, it was tough. It was an intense meeting, right? Okay. But it wasn't just crying, it was about dreaming as well, right? And then of course I told them about okay, what are your dreams for this yearbook for this year then? Okay, let's talk about yearbook dreams too, right? And what do you want people to see? What do we want to accomplish this year? And of course, a big part of the dream for yearbook that year became how do we care for one another? How do we help each other achieve goals? How do we help them, someone else achieve their dreams? Because there's something powerful, not just achieving your dreams, but helping fulfill other people's dreams, right? And this is why all these philanthropists, what do, right? When they're done making their billions, they want to give it away. They want to share what they've known, right? What they've learned, right? And there's this intrinsic joy in sharing, right? In helping other people fulfill their goals. And so, as I've been trying to develop this culture of caring more than just about the book, right? When you care about like that individual, right? You know, this was a long time. This was a long time ago, in the early days of the Oprah show. She had a couple of gang members on her show, and she was interviewed them. And one was like he was like 10, 12-year-old gang member, right? And they asked him like, if your gang asked you to steal, would you steal? He's like, yes, ma'am. He's a very polite young man, right? If your gang asked you to, you know, fight, would you fight? Yes, ma'am. If your gang asked you to kill, would you kill? Yes, ma'am. Okay. You know these things are wrong, right? Yes, ma'am, I do know. Okay. If you know they're wrong, why would you do it? And he said, ma'am, when you're cared for, you just do about anything, you know? And that's when I realized I need to stop focusing on just this book, you know? I need to focus on the people, right? I need to focus on building these people up to be the best version of themselves, you know, to be something they didn't imagine they could be, you know? It doesn't mean setting low bars, right? It's a very high bar, right? It's accountability. And I think that's why for me, you know, Yearbook has meant so much, you know. Um, as I look at this 12 yearbooks, there's an incredible sense of pride, not because of the great photos of the designs, but because of how these 12 books represent so much of my life. I think when I look back upon my life, this is going to be possibly one of my biggest accomplishments. And that's sad to say, you know, because I'm like, wow, it was about these books that are collecting dust, maybe, you know. It's not about that though, because representing these 12 books are the people behind it, you know, um, and the countless relationships I've formed, right? And as you know, when you're a yearbook advisor or a teacher, sometimes you're not just a teacher or advisor, you're their parent, right? You're their counselor, okay? You're their coach, right? Um, and and actually they started calling me, I don't know why, it was very strange. My first year as advisor, they gave me a nickname, Mother Kim, right? And I'm like, why mother? I'm like a male, like why am I your mother, right? And I don't know why. I didn't argue with it. They started calling me Mother Kim, Mother Kim. I'm like, okay. Right, fine, okay. Because I guess calling me father, daddy, that would be weird, right? Okay, that would be also equally weird, right? But I adopted that. I think partly because I fed them so much, partly because I cleaned up after them, right? But there was something endearing about that, you know, about becoming a family and calling me mother. Some of them still, after like, you know, 10, 12 years, they still call me like, oh, hey mother, how you doing? I'm like, oh, hello. And the people around me like, oh, why are you calling me a mother, right? Okay. And it's the relationship that I still formed, you know, that to this day. And you know, when I think about each of these kids, you know, that are now adults, um, and how they're still continuing to support each other, you know, they went on. Many of them went on to all my editors-in-chief. They've gone on to do great things, really, right? My first editor-in-chief, right out of college, she worked for Saatchi and Saatchi, which is the number one of the most prestigious ad agencies in California, right? Saatchi and Saatchi. So she worked there doing commercials for Toyota. Or was it for Hyundai? And then she went to work for Toyota's advertising agency. Now she's at the Garage, which does all the commercials for Mazda. So she's like moving on and up in the ad agency, which is a very difficult industry to get into. You know, Karen, my second editor-in-chief, she was a product manager at Dropbox. She went to Stanford. Right? Dana is a recruiter at Facebook. You know, Ha's a coder she just got hired by Microsoft, making way more in her first year than I'm making in my 30th year teaching. Right? Embarrassing, like so sad, right? Okay. And so I remember having dinner with them, a couple of them, with Karen and with Ha, in the Bay Area, because I went to visit their company. I love visiting their companies because they feed you so well. It's all free food, right? Like Facebook's food is amazing. One of the best places to eat is actually Dropbox, right? They have like 7 different stations with like it looks like a Michelin starred restaurant. That's what it looks like. It's individually plated. It looks like amazing, right? Just Google search Dropbox lunch, and it's just like unbelievable, right? So I love going there to visit them because I love the free food there. It's incredible. And I just love seeing where they work, and they gave me a tour of their company or whatnot. So, and then after that I was having dinner with a couple of them, a couple of editors in chief, former editors in chief, and I told them, like, you guys made it. You guys are, Silicon Valley is the pinnacle of careers, right? That's where everything, that you made it. That's the highest salaries in the world, highest rent as well in Silicon Valley. And I said, you guys made it, okay? How do we get more kids from Garden Grove High School to come to where you are? Because some of them, they don't see this vision, you know? And most of my students at that time in high school, they work at boba shops, okay? And I didn't think about that, but all my editors in chief, they worked at boba shops, right? Partly because Garden Grove is like almost like boba capital in the United States, actually. There are more boba, like you throw a baseball any direction, you can hit it at a boba shop, right? That's how many boba shops we have in Garden Grove, right? So they all work there because their friends work there, right? So, and my son made me aware of this. He's like only 10. He's like, Dad, how come all of your students work at boba shops? I'm like, oh my goodness, you're right. They all work at boba shops, right? Yeah. And they used to even start working at boba shops when they go to college too, right? Because that's where all their friends work. A couple of kids made it out and got internships at these amazing places, and then eventually started working in Silicon Valley. So I told that group, I'm like, you guys, we need to get kids out of here. I want to plan a trip, okay? Next summer, I want to bring a bunch of yearbook editors in chief, former yearbook kids, former yerds, to come up here, and I want them to visit you guys, okay, at your companies, and I want you to feed them and mentor them, right? And they're like, that sounds like a great idea. I talk a lot about ideas, right? They always like, oh, okay, what's Mr. Kim's idea this year, right? Okay, some of them come to fruition, some don't. Next day, I get a text from texted me, and she was an intern that year in Silicon Valley. She was going to Duke, and she was an intern, and she's like texted me, and she goes, Mr. Kim, I'm making $1,000 a week right now, okay? Let's make that trip this year. I'll donate $1,000 to fly them up here this year, and they could tour. And I'm like, wow. And they don't come from like very rich homes, by the way, right? But she was willing to donate her whole entire week's salary to do that. And I'm like, wow, that's incredible. Okay, so let's make it happen. So I contacted all these different people I knew at Google, Facebook, Dropbox, Adobe, Uber, no, not Uber, but Airbnb. All our former students were there, right? So we set up a 2-3 day trip. They got to, see the Golden Gate Bridge. We flew them up there at a hotel. They drove Uber, took Uber around, and they visited all these. And they were like, their eyes were open, right? And they could see this. And then right before that trip, like somebody found out that I was creating this trip, right? And so more people started calling, Mr. Kim, I want to donate money too. Like, I'll put in $500. I'm like, what? That's a lot of money, right? A lot of adults would not donate $1,000, okay? And these weren't necessarily, some of them knew this kid, some of them didn't. It didn't matter, okay? So when they went to those trips, their eyes were open, okay? And so guess what? The people that went to that trip, this summer, they're all in internships. Tam that went on that trip, she got, right after that trip, she got a small internship. Then she got an internship at Target. Then she got an internship at Facebook. And then now she's at Adobe, where she wants to be, okay? And Tiffany, she's in Seattle right now, interning at Amazon, right? Okay. And then Stacy that went on that trip as well, she's interning at an accounting firm, okay? And Kenny is helping, different people get accounting internships, right? Okay. They're making it, and they're helping each other out even after all these years, okay? And for me, I can't imagine of a more rewarding experience than seeing them care for each other long after they're done with high school, right? And Yearbook is something that stays with people long after high school. When you create a culture of caring, of nurturing people, of mentoring people, they don't mind dropping $1,000 to help each other out, okay? Of showing them around their company, of putting in a good word for them when they apply for their internships, And the Yearbook takes care of itself. When you build into the people, just like with the Janko company, there was no turnover rate anymore afterwards because they believed in each other. They cared about each other's dreams, okay? Having said that, of course, it's not an easy path. It takes a lot of work still.